This webinar was recorded on September 21st, 2022, and has been edited for production quality.
So hello everyone, and welcome to the Oregon Department of Education Child Nutrition Programs webinar for the 1-month enrollment roster or OMER procedure. This webinar is a part of a series of technical assistance trainings that we are providing to child and adult care food program sponsors. My name is Eliza Kondo, and I'm going to be your MC for today. Shannon Smith will be your chat and QA host today, and she will be tracking any questions that you have for our Q&A session at the end. For all attendees, go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat if you have not done so already. Please share your name and the name of the organization that you work with. Joining us today are our amazing presenters. I'm going to go ahead and let each of them introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Caitlin Screen, and I'm a child nutrition specialist with ODE CNP, and I'm happy to be here with you today.
Hi, y'all. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kathy Brock, and I'm a child nutrition specialist and summer food service program outreach coordinator for ODE CNP. Thank you for attending.
Thanks, Caitlin and Kathy. Let's take a quick look at what will be presented today. First, I'm going to be going over our learning objectives for this training. Then Caitlin will give us a brief overview of what the OMER is. Kathy will then dive into procedures associated with the OMER, and then we'll jump back to Caitlin, who'll discuss completing the OMER. Finally, we'll end today with a Q&A section. So here are the 3 learning objectives we hope you leave with today. The first is to understand the definition and purpose of the OMER, to be able to complete an OMER completely and correctly, and to have a written policy and procedure for developing and reporting the OMER. Caitlin's now going to walk you through our first topic, the OMER review.
Thanks, Eliza. As Eliza said, I'm going to take you through a 1-month enrollment roster or OMER overview. OMERs are required for child care centers, adult daycare centers, outside school hour centers, and Head Starts with community slot sites. The OMER requirements are not applicable to sponsors operating at risk, homeless/emergency shelter, or Head Starts that do not provide meals to community or sibling participants. ODE CNP uses what's called a percentage reimbursement method for determining a sponsor's unique reimbursement rate. This rate is based on the percentage of free, reduced price, and above scale enrolled participants at each approved CACFP site. Sponsors receive the highest reimbursement rate for participants who are eligible for free meals, a reduced rate for reduced price participant meals, and the lowest rate for participants in the above scale category. However, as sponsors are not required to report meal claims on an individual basis, the unique reimbursement rate is created annually and applied to all meals that are served to participants at the site. As a CACFP sponsor, it is your organization's responsibility to report the number of free, reduced price, and above scale participants and the number of participants enrolled in care during the first month of the fiscal year for each approved CACFP site. Which leads to, how is this done? This is done by creating a 1-month enrollment roster, or OMER. That's how. The OMER is created and reported by sponsors annually for each approved CACFP site. Reporting means that when the first claim of the fiscal year is submitted, the numbers of free, reduced price, and above scale participants is submitted in CNP Web in the claim. For most sponsors, the report month is October, as that is the start of the fiscal year. The OMER includes all participants enrolled in care. This includes infants and drop-in participants. Drop-in participants are those who do not have a regular schedule at the center. Both of these groups must be listed on the OMER. A participant is considered enrolled starting the month that the parent or guardian signs and dates the child enrollment form. This does not have to correlate to when or how much they attend that site. We'll talk more about this later. Once the OMER is reported in CNP Web, the OMER numbers automatically roll over month to month in CNP Web after the initial claim is submitted. We'll talk more about that later, and what a sponsor can do if they experience a drastic change in the demographics a site serves. ODE CMP has developed the OMER spreadsheet for sponsors to use to calculate the number of free, reduced price, and above scale participants for their sites. First, the OMER template can be found on the Packet tab in CMP Web. If you do not have CMP Web access, you can also find the OMER template on the ODE CMP CACFP public website. Click on the links to the Forms, Documents, Handbooks, and Manual page. From there, scroll down to the Child Care Centers dropdown, and in this section, you will find the CACFP 1-month enrollment roster Excel spreadsheet. Click on this link to download it. The OMER is an Excel spreadsheet that uses functions to help sponsors in creating and reporting their OMER. I will be going through this tool with you all in more detail later in the presentation. There are 2 supporting documents that are needed to complete the OMER in childcare settings. First is the Child Enrollment Form, also known as the CEF. A valid CEF is required to be on file for all participants listed on the OMER. Another common supporting document is the confidential income statement, which we will refer to as a CIS. The CIS is not required for participants to be listed on the OMER, but it is required if the participant will be marked as free or reduced price eligible on the OMER. We'll go more in depth on these in the next section. In addition to the procedure we'll review in this webinar, there is an OMER quick reference guide that's available to guide sponsors through the OMER process as well. This resource is located in the same dropdown we went to locate the OMER Excel document. Shannon will share the link to the OMER quick reference guide in the chat now. So this brings us to our first poll question. Now that we've covered some OMER basics, where can you find the 1-month enrollment roster? Is it in the packet in the Packet tab in CMP Web, B, on the ODE CMP CACFP public website, both A and B, or neither of these places? I will give you just a little bit of time here to go ahead and answer this question. All right, so we'll go ahead and close that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's go ahead and see our answers. Oh, and it looks like pretty much everybody got it. The answer is both A and B, which is answer C. You can find the ODE or the OMER on the ODE CMP CACFP website and on the Packet tab in CMP Web. And with that, I am going to pass the mic to Kathy, who will take us through the OMER procedures and its co-stars.
Great, thank you, Caitlin, and that's right. Now we're going to take a close look at the procedure templates sponsors can use at their organizations to ensure their OMER and all forms associated with it are complete and valid. If these procedures are followed according to plan, it can result in an administrative review with no findings around these areas. So without further delay, let's get to it. There are 3 ODE CMP developed procedure templates that relate to the OMER. The OMER is so important it needs 2 other procedures to support its creation. Child care centers, adult daycares, and outside school hours centers are all required to have an OMER, but there are differences in procedures regarding enrollment and participant eligibility for adult daycare and outside school hours care centers. There may also be differences between child care center sponsors and sites on how they determine eligibility. This training and the ODE CMP developed procedure templates are focused on what is most typical for CACFP sponsors. The procedure templates we will review today include child enrollment forms, another on confidential income statements, and finally one for the OMER. On these templates, there will be gray fields and checkboxes. The gray areas indicate a place that needs to be completed by you as a sponsor and will be specific to your organization's operations. If there's a checkbox and the item applies to your organization, make sure you check that checkbox and complete the section. Since enrollment forms are required for a participant to be listed on the OMER, we will start with reviewing that procedure first. The Child Enrollment Form, also known as the CEF, is one of the most important documents in the CACFP related to reimbursement, as the CEF is required to be completed and valid in order for participants to be listed on the OMER. Without a CEF, the participant cannot be listed on the OMER, nor can meals be claimed for reimbursement for them. Not being able to list participants on the OMER due to missing or invalid CEFs can affect a sponsor's unique reimbursement rate. CEFs are required to be completed or at least updated annually. The CEF procedure will lead staff through the process of distributing, reviewing, and ensuring accuracy on the CEF. Before we get into our deep dive in this template, it is important to note that child daycare and outside school hours care centers are all required to maintain enrollment documentation on file. For child care centers, ODE CMP has developed the child enrollment form for use in the CACFP and the accompanying procedure template we are about to review. Adult daycare, outside school hours care centers are required to use their own enrollment documentation. That said, ODE CMP does not have a procedure template specific for these types of sites. Sponsors of these sites are still required to have a written procedure. The template we are about to review may be edited to fit your organization's needs if it does not already have a written enrollment procedure. The first step in the process is identifying what position is responsible for distributing CEFs, how this is done, and when it occurs. Both sections on distribution to new participants and current participants are required to be completed. If infants are in care at the center, this section must be checked and completed as well. Included in this step, there's a section regarding what staff position is responsible for following up on distributed CEFs that are not returned in the prescribed timeline and methods that will be used to follow up. Steps 2 and 3 of the CEF procedure are more general. These steps address the who of collecting and completing the initial review of CEFs, how returned CEFs are handled, which staff position will receive the CEFs after the initial review, and how they should be given to that position. Step 4 of the process outlines what is needed for a CEF to be considered to be complete. As a reminder, only participants who are cared for by the center can be included on the CEF and listed on the OMER. This means that siblings who do not receive care at the center and siblings that have not yet entered the world cannot be listed on the CEF as they're not in the care of the facility and will not be consuming CACFP meals. If this is found on review and this type of participant is listed on the OMER, they will be removed, which may result in a fiscal assessment. If at some point either of these groups joins a participant in care at the facility, the family can complete a new CEF or update the current CEF to include the new participant. Now let's take a look at the CEF to highlight important sections and the difference between a valid CEF and a complete CEF. A valid CEF is required to be on file for all participants listed on the OMER for a child care center. For a CEF to be considered valid, the following sections must be completed. The sponsor or site name, which this line may be completed by the sponsor, the participant's full name, the parent or guardian printed name and signature, and the date. Also, a CEF is valid from the month the CEF is signed in until the end of the same month 1 year later. If a participant listed on the form is an infant, the infant benefits section must also be completed. The sponsor may complete the type of formula that the site offers to these infants. As a reminder, aside from the infant formula provided by the center and the sponsor or site name, the CEF must be completed by the family or caregivers. There is a difference between having a valid CEF and a complete CEF, as valid forms are not always complete forms. For a CEF to be considered complete, all sections must be completed, e.g. the whole form. This means in addition to the sections previously highlighted, normal hours, normal meals, and normal days in care must also be completed. Now, do families have to adhere to the days, hours, and meals in care at all times? No, they do not. Family schedules change constantly. An estimate on when participants will be in care is better than an incomplete form. ODE CMP reviewers will verify CEFs for the month an administrative review is held in, plus the test month to ensure that these forms are valid. So even though the OMER is only required to be reported once a year, sponsors are required to maintain current and valid CEFs at all times they are claiming meals for participants. Due to the importance of this, we're going to take a quick detour here to highlight what it means if CEFs are considered to be incomplete or invalid during an administrative review. Failure to have complete CEF forms on file may result in administrative review findings and corrective action. Failure to have valid CEFs can result in administrative review findings, and if the participant is listed on the OMER, that participant will be removed from the OMER. There may also be meals disallowed for participants without a valid CEF, as well as fiscal assessment against the sponsor. It is in both the sponsors and ODE's best interest for all participants to have complete and valid CEFs on file. Although adult daycares and outside school hour centers are not required to collect CEFs, enrollment documentation must also be on file for these participants. Going back to step 4 in the procedure in section B, complete what is done if the CEF is not complete or valid and what staff position is responsible for carrying this step out. In step 5, name the staff responsible for oversight on the CEF process. Oversight here is ensuring participants have a complete and accurate CEF on file. There is a date and time frame field here as well. Pro tip, as OMERs are reported in October, unless the organization is joining the CACFP outside of the renewal period, this date cannot be any later than October 31st. As a reminder, this is the date that CEFs are due, not the date that the OMER must be created by. This date will not apply to new participants as they are still required to have a complete and valid CEF on file, no matter when they start attending the site. Step 6 of this procedure refers to the claim procedure. Participants without a current and valid CEF on file not only cannot be listed on the OMER, but they also cannot have meals claimed under the CACFP. This is one of the reasons it is imperative to ensure participants have a current and valid CEF on file. Step 7 ties the CEF procedure to the OMER procedure. However, this does not mean we're done with the CEF procedure yet, as there's still a few more items to address in this procedure. Next is expiring forms. As I stated earlier, CEFs are only valid for up to 1 year from the month they were signed in. In step 8, select one of the 2 methods staff will use to check for expiring CEFs by checking the applicable box and completing the section's fields. The 2 methods outlined here are to have a staff person check CEFs monthly to ensure all participants have a complete and valid CEF on file, or to use a reminder system for expiring CEFs. Both methods include naming staff positions that is responsible for making sure all forms are completed, what they will do, as well as the time frame they have to complete it in. Now let's put what we just reviewed on the CEF to the test. What sections of the CEF are required to be completed for it to be considered valid? Is it participant name, parent or guardian signature and date? Participant name, meals and care and date? Participant name, parent and guardian signature name, and meals and care? Or site name, participant name, and date? Go ahead and select what you think is needed for a CEF to be considered valid. And we'll shut her down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And drum roll, please. Dun, da, da, da. All right. Yes, A was the answer in this one. So that's participant name, parent and guardian signature, and the date. So all of these items are needed for a CEF to be valid and for the participant to be listed on the OMER. If any of these items are missing, that will result in the participant being removed from the OMER. Now that we have reviewed the CEF and how it relates to the OMER, it is time to address how sponsors will determine participant eligibility. Now, the confidential income statement, also known as the CIS, is the most common item used by sponsor staff to determine participants' eligibility. The CIS form is not required for the participant to receive CACFP meals or be listed on the OMER. However, this is the form families can complete in order for a sponsor to determine the child to be free or reduced price eligible for meals. Meaning if your center's OMER is being reviewed for an administrative review, ODE CMP may expect to see there to be a current and valid CIS on file for all participants that are marked as free or reduced price. No CIS? Then that participant must be marked as above scale unless they are eligible based on alternate documentation. We will talk more about alternate documentation later in the presentation. The CIS procedure takes staff through the CIS process, all the way from distribution of the forms to what to do when CIS expire and every step in between. The first step in the process is naming what position is responsible for distributing CISs, how it is done, and when this occurs. Both sections on new participants and current participants are required to be completed. There is also a section on staff responsible for following up on distributed CISs that are not returned in the prescribed timeline and the methods for follow-up. Step 2 addresses the who of collecting CISs, the who of completing initial review of CISs, how they are handled between these positions, and how/where they are stored. Moving right along to step 3 of the procedure, sponsors will list the responsible staff for the initial review of the CIS, as well as a time frame for review. It is important to note that step 3 can be used by the initial reviewer to determine if the CIS is complete. Depending on how the family qualifies for free or reduced price meals will determine what sections of the CIS must be complete. Information from the CIS must be referred to as well with this procedure. Also in step 3, there are instructions for both centers with children and centers with adults. Select the section that applies to your center. The procedure includes the details of what is needed for a form to be considered complete based on how the family can qualify for free or reduced price meals. There are 6 sections on the CIS for childcare and 5 sections on the CIS for adult care. Select the appropriate process accordingly. This section is a guide as how to determine if a section of the CIS form is complete. In order for the CIS to be considered valid, Section 1, Household Information, Section 2, Child, meaning participants, information, and Section 5, Signature, Date, and last 4 or no Social Security number. Like the CEF, the CIS is valid from the month it is signed in until the end of the same month 1 year later. Like the CEF, the CIS is considered valid if these sections are completed. However, unlike the CEF, it's not always straightforward on when a CIS may be considered completed. There are 3 ways a CIS may be considered to be completed based on how it is completed. So, first is if the child is a foster child. This is the only additional area that must be completed on the CIS. If the family is eligible based on public benefits, such as SNAP or TANF, Section 3 will be completed in addition to the other sections. And if the family is eligible based on income, then Section 4 must be completed. Note that only one of these 3 sections is required to be completed in order to determine family or participant eligibility. The CIS forms for adult daycare looks a little different, but the same concepts to determine eligibility apply. If the CIS is incomplete, Here is the piece of the procedure that identifies the position with the responsibility to contact the family and the timeline for returning CIS forms. With step 4, the staff position responsible for making the eligibility determination is named, as well as the time frame for making the determination. Once again, there's a section for child care centers and adult daycares. This step describes how the eligibility official will make their determinations of participant eligibility. Included in Part D of this step is a scale of convenience if multiple qualification sections are completed. In step 5, we're going to name the staff responsible for conducting the double checking of the eligibility determination and completeness of CISs. Step 6 names the staff position responsible for the oversight of the CIS process. Oversight here is ensuring all completed CISs are collected. There's a date here as well. Like CEFs, CISs need to be collected, reviewed, and have eligibility determinations made prior to completing the OMER. And step 7, again with this step, it ties the CIS procedure to the OMER procedure for current forms. CIS forms also need to be completed annually, meaning there's still more to cover with the CIS process. First, let's review step 8, how sponsor staff will handle expiring forms. Like CEFs, select one of these methods staff will use for checking for expiring CISs by checking the applicable box and completing the section. The two methods outlined here are to have the staff person responsible check monthly to ensure all participants have a complete and valid CIS on file if they're being claimed for free or reduced price meals, or to use a reminder system for expiring CISs. Both methods include what staff position is responsible for making sure all forms are updated, what they will do, as well as the time frame to complete it in. Finally, new CIS forms must be completed annually. This is due to the USDA releasing updated information on income guidelines in order to make eligibility determinations. Families must complete a new CIS annually for centers to make accurate eligibility determinations. In step 9, identify who is responsible for making sure that the updated CIS goes out to families. Eligibility guidelines are updated each year with a start date of July 1 and end date of June 30 of the next year. This is not in alignment with the CACFP fiscal year that is from October 1 to September 30. So it is important that a watchful eye is kept for when these forms need to be distributed. As we mentioned earlier, the CIS is not the only way a participant may be considered to be eligible for free reduced price meals. However, it is required that all participants are given the opportunity to complete a CIS form. If a CIS is not returned, there is alternate documentation that may be used to determine free meal eligibility. In the case of childcare and outside school hour centers, documentation that indicates the participant is enrolled in Head Start or Early Head Start, that the participant is a migrant, the participant is homeless or at risk for homelessness, or they have siblings or qualify for free meals at school, all may be used to determine participant eligibility. If your organization uses alternate forms of determining eligibility, ensure that it is included in your organization's written procedure. For more information what this documentation looks like, please see Chapter 3 of the CACFP Policy and Procedure Manual. We will be adding a link to the chat for your convenience. Adult daycare centers may use information from enrollment forms to determine eligibility if the following items are included on the enrollment form: the benefit type, the benefit number, a signature from the participant or guardian on the form, and the date. For more information on eligibility for adult daycare homes, please see Chapter 21 of the CACFP Policy and Procedure Manual. Now let's see what from the CIS procedure stuck. How can a participant qualify for free meals? Is it A, public benefits, which can be through SNAP or TANF or Medicaid for adult participants, household income, foster child, where foster care is mediated by a governing entity, or all of the above? I'll give you a few moments here to select your answers. Okay, and I think we should be shutting this down here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what does the audience say? How can people qualify for these? Yes, it is all of the above. So a foster child is just one of the three, well, one of the many ways that they can qualify for free or reduced price meals. Although with foster child and public benefits, both of those are automatically free qualifications. But that's more in the instructions on your CIS forms. So in any case, participants do not need to complete both the public benefit section and the household income section if the participant has a public benefit information completed. As a reminder, no matter how they qualify, they must have all information for the applicable section completed. If the participant qualifies as a foster child, documentation must also be on file at your center to show and support the determination. Incomplete or inaccurate public benefit or household income sections or missing foster care documentation will result in the participant being moved from free to the above scale during the administrative review. Now, at this point, we have procedures for the CEF and the CIS. Now let's pull it all together with the 1-month enrollment report procedure, aka the OMER. Last and certainly not least is the 1-month enrollment roster procedure. The OMER is a document that is created to determine our center's unique reimbursement rate. This unique reimbursement rate is based on the percentages of free, reduced price, and above scale eligible participants enrolled in the center. The OMER includes all enrolled participants, meaning all participants with current and valid CEFs at the time of the development of the OMER. The first step of the process is to determine the staff responsible for collecting and compiling the documentation to create the OMER and the timeline to do so. The second step is who will develop the OMER and when they will have it developed by. Step 3 is an overview of how to develop and what to keep in mind when developing the OMER. Now let's put a box around Part D here. If a participant does not have a CIS form or alternate eligibility, they must be marked as above scale on the OMER. If your organization uses alternate documentation as well to determine eligibility, you may edit this line to include what other types of eligibility documentation your organization utilizes. As a reminder, a participant is not required to have a CIS to be included on the OMER, but a child enrollment form or other enrollment is. So let's take a quick peek at the OMER to see how the information from the CEF and CIS are used. We're going to review completing the OMER as if your center is using CEFs and CIS forms. If your organization is an adult daycare or outside school hours care center, please think of CEF as enrollment documentation. The information on the CEF is used for completing the participant name and current CACFP enrollment date columns. The information on the CIS will be used for the eligibility determination and the CIS determination date. These columns are all next to each other. There is another column here as well if alternate eligibility documentation is used. Only use this column if alternate eligibility documentation is being used to make a determination. The CIS determination date entered in this column must match the effective date of the income eligibility determination, which will either be the date of signature of adult household member, meaning the date the participant's family signs and dates the form, or the date of determining official signature. The determining official signature date is the date the determining official enters after they have reviewed the form and made the eligibility determination for the participant. Based on what your organization selects for the effective date is what ODE CMP reviewers will use for verifying the OMER. Step 4 is the all-important double check system. In this step, you're naming the position that will double check the OMER, the time frame they have to do so, and the who and what if there's an error that needs correcting. If there's a triple check, complete the who and when that will occur as well. Finally, step 5 may be captain obvious to some and not so captain obvious to others. And that is what you use your OMER numbers for and when, and ties it all back to the claims procedure. Included in the OMER procedure is what to do if your center experiences a substantial change to the free reduced price above scale ratios during the fiscal year and would like to request an OMER revision in CMP Web. ODE CMP does not have a definition for substantial change, but the change does not need to impact meal reimbursement, or does need to impact meal reimbursement a considerable amount. For example, a change of 6 participants moving from above scale to free at a site with 40 participants will have a larger impact on reimbursement than a site with 120 participants. In order to determine what your new reimbursement could be, please use the CACFP reimbursement estimate calculator. Shannon will share a link to this in the chat. Sponsors are not required to request a revision if changes occur, but the option to do so is available. This part of the procedure names the position responsible for monitoring the need for a revision, the parameter that must be met by your organization to request a revision, and how that staff person will proceed. And here's where all 3 templates line up. So with part B of these procedure templates, it will cover where these records are kept. For both CEF and CIS records, these records may be completed on paper or electronically. Describe here what these completed records can be found. Be as specific as possible when describing where this documentation is held. If it is being stored in a binder, where can someone unfamiliar with this documentation find that binder? It's important to note that since these records contain sensitive information, these must be stored securely and confidentially. As the OMER is an Excel document, this should be saved and stored electronically. The OMER has formulas in it that will only work if it is completed electronically. Additionally, ODE CMP reviewers will ask for the OMER to be submitted to them as an Excel file electronically for review. And as a friendly reminder, all records must be maintained for 3 years plus the current fiscal year. These records must be made available to ODE CMP upon request. If any of these documents cannot be located during a review, it can result in substantial fiscal action and review findings. Admin reviews can run smoothly if documentation is maintained and readily available. As the old adage goes, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Finally, we have the procedure backups. This will identify who will do which steps if the staff person originally assigned to the task is unavailable. Remember, procedures are a guide for staff to follow to ensure programmatic requirements are met and ensuring compliance in the CACFP for your organization. Be as descriptive as possible, and more importantly, train staff on these procedures. Just as food is not nutrition unless it's eaten, written procedures aren't any good if they're not put to use. If you have any questions as you're developing any of these procedures, please reach out to your assigned child nutrition specialist. We are here to help. And it's time for another quick poll. What is needed to complete a 1-month enrollment report? Is it a child enrollment form, confidential income statement, a 1-month enrollment template, or all of the above? Give you guys a little bit of time here to select your answers on what do you need to complete your 1-month enrollment roster. Okay, I hope you all have your selections in because we're going to close it up in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, yes, we got it. So all these items are needed to complete the 1-month enrollment report. Without current and valid CEFs or other enrollment documentation, participants cannot be listed on the OMER. Without current and valid CIS forms or other acceptable eligibility documentation, you are unable to make eligibility determinations. And of course, you cannot develop an OMER without the template. From here, I'm going to toss this back over to Caitlin, who's going to lead us through on completing the OMER. So Caitlin, take it away.
Thank you, Kathy. Now let's put those templates that Kathy just reviewed into practice. In this section, we will do a quick overview of how to complete the OMER Excel spreadsheet, common OMER errors, and entering your site's OMER participant eligibility information into CNP Web. Because there are so many documents and steps that go into completing the OMER, it is essential that sponsors stay organized. Before completing the OMER, sponsors should have a list of all participants who are eligible to attend their center during the OMER month that should be included on the OMER. This is often a center or program enrollment list and provides a comparison for the CEFs and CISs your organization has on file, so you can confirm that all forms that should be collected have been. As Kathy mentioned, the OMER is a reflection of the center's enrollment for the first month of the fiscal year, typically October, not who actually attended during that month. As Kathy also so eloquently just covered, the OMER cannot be created without CEF and CIS forms. The Child Enrollment Form template details completing the first step of the OMER, collecting and reviewing CACFP enrollment forms. CACFP child enrollment forms determine who should be listed on the OMER. The confidential income statement template details completing the second step of the OMER, collecting, reviewing, and determining all participants' eligibility status based on the CIS information that was submitted or not submitted. Confidential income statements determine the what reimbursement level that eligible participants on the OMER qualify for. When you open up your OMER Excel document, you will see that the first tab located at the bottom of the page is labeled Instructions. This tab covers all of the information I will be reviewing in the next few slides. Each time you complete the OMER, read through the instructions carefully to make sure you have a clear understanding of the different functions built into the spreadsheet and what information is needed to be entered in each section of the OMER. If you are not a for-profit center, you may only work on the OMER tool once every year, and a review of the instructions tab is always a good idea. Also, while completing the OMER spreadsheet, questions or error messages pop up, this tab is an excellent reference. The second tab of the spreadsheet is labeled Site Name. This tab can be renamed with the name of the specific site you are completing the OMER for by double-clicking the tab and entering the name of the site that OMER will be representing. This can be particularly helpful if you have multiple sites that you are completing an OMER for and you plan to have all sites in the same Excel document. The Site Name tab contains the 1-month enrollment roster spreadsheet, which can be viewed as two sections, the summary section and the participant details section. The first piece of information you will enter when completing the summary section of the form is the agency or sponsor name section, now outlined in blue. This should be the same name as the name used for your organization's CACFP sponsor agreement. Next is the CNP Web site name, now highlighted in yellow. Again, the site name listed here should match the name of the approved site in CNP Web. That the eligibility information will be entered for during this first claim month of the fiscal year, typically October. When you select a cell where you indicate the site type that the OMER is documenting, now outlined in red, you will see a small gray box with a drop-down with a downward pointing arrow. This means there's a drop-down list. By clicking the gray drop-down arrow, a list of eligible site types will appear for you to choose from. The options are childcare centers, Head Starts, outside school hour centers, and adult daycare centers. Similarly, when you select the cell under month, now outlined in purple, a drop-down list of all months will appear. This is where you document which month your OMER represents. Selecting the year that your OMER is documenting, now outlined in green, also uses a drop-down list. Next is the effective date of income eligibility determination, now outlined in orange, which also uses a drop-down list. This piece of information comes from the confidential income statement forms and there are one of two options that can be used when completing the OMER, but not both. When entering a CIS determination date, either the date of dates of signature of adult household member or the date of determining official signature can be used. The same type of effective date of income eligibility determination must be used for every CIS form included on the OMER. Each piece of information documented in the summary section of the OMER is key to the function of the spreadsheet, as multiple formulas, formatting, and error notices use this information. The sections of the OMER form now outlined in navy do not require any information to be entered by the sponsor. Formulas or equations embedded in the spreadsheet calculate the totals for each eligibility type automatically as the OMER participant information section is completed. If eligibility information is entered in this section by the sponsor, it will be overriding important notifications regarding potential errors that impact the total number of participants for each eligibility category. Finally, the sections in dark green are completed by the sponsor once both the summary section and the participant section of the OMER have been completed. This section documents the staff that completed the OMER spreadsheet, the date it was completed, and a certification that all of the enrollment and eligibility information for current participants is true and correct, and that records are available to support this document. The second section of the OMER spreadsheet is where all the relevant OMER information for all eligible participants is entered from the supporting OMER documents, the CEF and CIS forms, or other eligibility documentation. The very first piece of information you will enter is the CIS or CEF number, now highlighted in blue. This number should be the same as the roster number listed on the CEF and CIS forms for participants whose information is being entered into this row. Next, you will enter the participant's name, last name, and first name in the section now outlined in green. Again, this name should match the ones listed on the participant's CEF and CIS forms. If a different name is listed on the CEF or CIS form, include what that other name is and which form it is on in the notes section outlined in purple. After that, you will enter the eligibility determination outlined in orange, based on the CIS form information, lack of a CIS form, or other eligibility determination if applicable. Because there are error messages and formatting built into the spreadsheet, as soon as something is entered into this section, warning formatting and error messages will appear. These alerts and error messages let you know that additional information is required to be entered into the spreadsheet before that participant's eligibility information will be counted in the total. Once the CIS determination date and CEF enrollment date are entered into the form, the errors will resolve and the participant's eligibility will be counted towards the total. Repeat these steps for each participant with a current and valid CEF form who were eligible to attend the center during the report month. Now that we've practiced running through the OMER, let's review with a couple of poll questions. Our first question is, what should you do if a parent or guardian does not complete a CIS form, but they did complete a CEF form? Should you A, save the CEF form until you can get a completed CIS and do not include them on the OMER? B, include them on the OMER and enter the eligibility determination level you think they will qualify for once the CIS is completed? C, include them on the OMER and enter the eligibility determination as above scale? Or D, panic? All right. And the poll will close in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right. So, well, nobody selected option D, which is great. Most of you looks like got it correct. The answer is C. Include them on the OMER, but list the eligibility determination as above scale. Way to go, everyone. The participant only needs a CIF form to be included on the OMER, But as I said, because there's no CIS or other eligibility determination to support free or reduced price eligibility, they must be listed as above scale. Okay, that takes us to our next question. So now, while we know that what the eligibility determination of a participant without a CIS should be above scale, what should you put on the OMER in the CIS determination date column if a participant has a CIF form but no CIS or other eligibility documentation on file? Should you A, leave it blank, B, enter the date the OMER is being completed, C, enter the date the determining official determined that the participant was above scale due to a lack of a CIS form, or D, the date that the parent or guardian signed the child enrollment form? I'll give you another minute to answer this one. All right, and we'll go ahead and close the poll here in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's take a look at those answers. So it looks like this one was tricky for most people. The correct answer is A. If there is no CIS form on file, the participant is marked as above scale in the OMER, and the CIS determination section can be left blank without any error messages popping up. All right, well, great job on those poll questions, everyone. Thanks for your participation. In this next section, we will take a look at errors or findings that are commonly found when ODE reviews OMERs. So the first error most often found during reviews is incorrect CEF and CIS dates. This means that the dates listed on the OMER do not match the dates of the parent or guardian signatures on the CEF or the effective date of income eligibility determination on the CIS form. If the CEF and CIS dates are entered incorrectly for a participant into the OMER, the formulas that detect issues and generate an alert message may not be triggered when they should be, resulting in errors that may or may not impact OMER eligibility numbers, which could then impact your reimbursement. While an incorrect day may not change much, listing the incorrect month or year can definitely cause a costly error. Another common finding is when a participant does not have a current or valid CEF on file for the report month, but is listed on the OMER. A similar finding is when the center has a participant who does have a current and valid CEF on file and are eligible to attend the center during the report month, but were not included on the OMER for their site. Both of these findings will result in a change to the total number of participants included on the OMER, which will then impact your center's reimbursement rate. And finally, possibly the most common error is human error. This happens when the eligibility of a participant is correctly determined on a CIS form, but incorrectly entered on the OMER. All of the errors can end up being costly as they can impact the OMER reimbursement rate. The best way to avoid these errors is to follow your organization's procedures and double check the OMER before moving forward to submitting eligibility information for the first claim month of the fiscal year. Now that we know why reviewing the OMER is so important, let's run through a practice double check. Take a couple of minutes to look at this example of the participant section of an OMER for October 2022. Try and see how many red flags or errors you can find. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time to review this example. Let's see if you all found the same errors. Let's start at the top. When reviewing Bluey Healer, hopefully the first thing that jumps out at you is the date listed in the current CACFP enrollment date column. This date is listed as 9/2/2021, meaning that it has expired by the OMER report month of October 2022. Bingo Healer, the second participant listed, also has the same error. This requires the reviewer to review the CACFP enrollment form for Bluey and Bingo to determine if the form is expired or if the date that was entered into the OMER incorrectly. Everything looks good for the belchers, so we will keep moving. Next, we have probably the most obvious error, one that we've discussed a few times already. Participants Arthur and DW Reed are documented as reduced price on the OMER, but the notes sections indicate that they do not have a CIS form on file. This means their eligibility determination must be revised to above scale, and there should be no date listed in the CIS determination date column. And finally, we have Peppa Pig. Their notes indicate that a Head Start roster was used to determine their eligibility, not a CIS form. A Head Start roster is considered an other eligibility determination, and the date that the Head Start roster was received or verified should be entered into the other eligibility determination date column, not the CIS determination date column. Now, of course, a review of the OMER Excel document alone is not enough to ensure that all errors are caught. That's why a double check of child enrollment forms, confidential income statements, and any other eligibility determination documents are essential to creating an accurate OMER. Once the OMER and supporting documents have been completed, reviewed, and certified, then the total number of free, reduced price, and above scale enrollment participants for the OMER month can be entered into the claim for that month in CNP Web. As a reminder, once the OMER free, reduced price, and above scale numbers have been entered into the site claim sheet for the first month of operation in CNP Web, another sponsor staff that is not the staff who originally completed the claim should review what has been entered matches the certified and reviewed OMER for the month before it is submitted for reimbursement. This final double check ensures that each site's OMER information is accurately reflected in the first claim of the fiscal year. As we wrap up this section, if you find that you still have questions regarding how to complete an OMER, or would like some resources to review as you complete your organization's OMER, please see the ODE recorded trainings for completing the OMER as a childcare center or an adult daycare center, or review the ODE OMER quick reference guide that was covered earlier in this presentation. All right, and with that, I will hand it back to Eliza.
Thanks, Caitlin. So last but definitely not least is our question and answer section. When you all registered, you had the option to submit questions to be covered during this webinar. Here we'll go over just a few of those scenarios. After we go over our prepared questions and answers, we'll take a look at any questions that have come into the chat during the webinar. Shannon, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Eliza. So we've had some really good questions come in. As we go through the next few slides, if you have any lingering questions that you haven't entered into the chat yet or haven't been covered during our webinar, go ahead and put those into the chat. We should have time to answer some additional questions when we're done with our prepared questions. So our first question is, what is the difference between an OMER and a for-profit roster? Kathy, could you answer this question for us?
I absolutely can, and this is a really great question. The OMER and the for-profit roster both use the same Excel document, but the purposes for it are quite different. So as we learned during this training, the OMER is used to determine a sponsor's unique reimbursement rate, and it's based off of the percentages of free, reduced price, and above scale who are enrolled at the site during the month of October or the first month of operation if different. For most sponsors, this reimbursement rate will remain in place for the entire fiscal year. OMERs are required for all child care centers, adult daycares, and outside school hour centers, and Head Starts that have community slots. On the other side, the for-profit roster is used for organizations that are for-profits in order to show that they are eligible to participate in the CACFP. So for-profit sponsors, they can only claim CACFP meals if at least 25% of each site's current enrollment or license capacity, whichever is less, are eligible for free reduced price meals in that month, then they'll be able to claim. Sponsors must create a roster each month, a for-profit roster for each site to verify eligibility prior to submitting the claim for reimbursement. For-profit rosters are required only for for-profit sponsors. So for-profit sponsors will be completing an OMER annually and a for-profit roster monthly. There's also one main difference between how these two tools are created. So the OMER must list all participants enrolled in the month that it's created. So usually that's October, while the for-profit roster will only include the participants that were in attendance during the month it is created. So due to this difference, the for-profit roster may differ from that site's OMER.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Our next question is, I've completed my OMER. Do I need to send it into ODE? Caitlin, could you answer this question for us?
Yes, of course. The answer to this question is no. The OMER does not need to be sent to ODE. You do, however, need to save your OMER in your files, and it must be made available upon request or during an administrative review by ODE.
Great, thank you. Let's see, the next question is, do I need to update my OMER if I have new participants that join mid-year? Kathy, could you answer this one for us?
You got it. No, it is not a requirement that the OMER be updated mid-year, even if you've added or removed participants. For most sponsors, October's enrollment is representative of enrollment patterns for the rest of the year. If there are significant changes that affect the reimbursement, a revision may be requested. So even though the OMER isn't required to be updated, you do need to be tracking and have these systems in place to ensure that CEFs are collected for all participants enrolled throughout the year, as discussed earlier in the presentation. Meals cannot be claimed for reimbursement for participants that do not have a valid CEF or other enrollment documentation. Some sponsors do choose to keep a working copy of the OMER so that they will add newly enrolled participants throughout the year, as well as removing them or inserting the drop date if they leave. So basically, when it comes time to create the OMER for the next year, the roster is basically ready to transfer over to the next OMER. And this is just one idea on how to track enrolled participants. It's not required.
Great, thank you. So our final prepared question that has a slide is, if we do use alternate eligibility determination other than CIS forms, how do we correctly document this on the OMER? Eliza, can you answer this question for us?
Sure thing, I'd be happy to. This is a great question. So all forms of eligibility determination must be documented. The documentation types will look different depending on what is used, but in all cases, documentation must always be on file. The date that eligibility documentation is received or saved by sponsor staff is the date entered on the OMER. This date is entered into the column titled Other Eligibility Determination Date, which is found next to the CIS determination date column. For example, if the sponsor receives a Head Start statement that certifies the child is enrolled in Head Start, the date that the statement is received and saved is the date that is entered onto the OMER. If you have any additional questions about specific eligibility documentation, please contact your assigned child nutrition specialist.
Thanks, Eliza, and thanks, team, for going over those questions. So I think that wraps up our Q&A section for today. If you have any additional questions that were not addressed today, please reach out to your assigned child nutrition specialist and they will help answer those questions for you. Eliza, I'm going to pass it back over to you now.
Thanks, Shannon and team, for answering all those questions. So sponsors who are looking for any additional information can refer to the ODE CMP monthly CACFP newsletter called Knowing and Growing. This newsletter will include all new memos that were released in the past month, in addition to information on available grants, trainings, and important deadlines. This is sent out each month to all the responsible principals listed in your CMP web sponsor info sheet, and information in this newsletter must be reviewed by the responsible principals. Memo updates and program updates are required information for sponsors to know while additional grant information and resources are helpful for review. If you're not on the list and you want to receive the newsletter, you can sign up using the link on the slide, and we'll also share that link in the chat. Before we end our session, here's a short message from the Oregon Department of Education. ODE supports equity and excellence for every learner and seeks to work with school districts, education service districts, and community partners like you. We believe all children should have access to high-quality, well-rounded learning experience. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. Thank you all for taking this training. We hope you all found it helpful. ODE CMP greatly appreciates all CACFP Oregon sponsors and their staff who work diligently to serve nutritious meals to participants while in care. We hope you all have a great remainder of your day, and thanks for joining us.